Hello? Oh, I'm not going to use the mic. I'm too loud. Hello, I'm here. No? Oh, okay. Whoa. Sorry. I'll try to not project my voice into a microphone. So we're here today to talk about, excuse me, where are my rebuild options? So a little bit about the presenters today. So they've developed a project where with every obstacle comes new opportunities to support rebuild of your community. The 2016 Horse River wildfire resulted in the loss of more than 2,500 homes in Fort McMurray. Pressures to rebuild was immense. In this presentation and workshop, the Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo planning staff will share some of the strategies, planning instruments, and tools used during the rebuild process. This interactive workshop will simulate some of the real-time conditions and challenges faced by the municipal planners. Participants will be tasked with identifying rebuild options while addressing challenges as new information arises. Participants will take away an understanding of the challenges of rebuilding in areas with non-conforming parcels, environmental constraints, grading challenges, and other issues. So with that, I would like to introduce our four presenters from Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo. Isela, and I do apologize if I butcher names, but Isela Contreras, Such Chadhook, Jasmine Kawar, and Jenica Collette.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today. My name is Isela Contreras. I'm a supervisor at the Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo. And I live here since 2006, and I've been working in planning and development since 2008. I'm here today with the three of my colleagues. We had worked together for a long time, and we worked together through the wildfire, the evacuation, and the rebuilding of the community. So I'm going to now give you an overview of what is happening with the presentation today. So we're going to give you an introduction about what happened in May 1st when the fire started, and then we're going to take you through May 3rd, which was the day of the massive evacuation of Fort McMurray. We're also going to talk about the re-entry efforts and what happened after the community came back, following by a workshop. So the workshop, we're going to give you two scenarios in this workshop, and they are very close to what we experienced. So they are real-life scenarios, a little bit changed, and we will try to give you the idea of what we lived through. A real experience of what we lived through that phase. We would like your input about that exercise, so we will have a debrief, and then after that we're going to talk about the processes that we implemented and the challenges that the team faced and how we solved these problems and what things we did to facilitate the rebuilding of the community. So now I'm going to introduce my team. So, Jenica.
Hi, I'm Jenica Collette. I'm originally from Northern Alberta, and I moved to Fort McMurray as a tiny person. In 2012, I started with the municipality as a co-op student and then came on full-time in 2016.
Hi there, I'm Jasmine. I started with the municipality in 2016, right after the wildfire, coming straight from India. So I'm very, very excited to share my experiences with you all.
Good afternoon. My name is Sach Chandyok. I'm a supervisor in Planning and Development Department. I've been here since 2012, so 7-8 years. Let's take you through the presentation. So to give you some context of the municipality, where we are located, who we are a specialized municipality in Alberta. That means we have rural areas and urban areas. There's one urban service area, which is Fort McMurray, and then there are 9 rural areas. The map on the right side of the screen shows you what those areas are, with a total population of about 111,000 people, of which about 80,000 reside in the urban service area. We are also the second largest municipality in all of Canada, with a total area of about 66,000 square kilometers. What I'm going to be discussing now is the timeline of how events happened during the wildfire. So May 1st, a fire started south of town and a state of local emergency was declared. May 3rd was the date when mass evacuations happened. June 1st, 2016 was the date when re-entry began in Fort McMurray. June 27th to 29, 2016 were the dates when demolition orders were issued. What these demolition orders are basically asking residents who were affected by the wildfire to bring down or to excavate their basements out of the lots. August 11th, 2016 was the date when the first development permit for reconstruction rebuilding was issued. September 27th, 2016 was the day when council approved a bylaw where all the fees related to rebuilding reconstruction were waived. August 28th, council approved an overlay bylaw. Now this was a bylaw which allowed for like construction. We'll talk about it in a little more detail as we go through the presentation. June 30th, 2017 was the deadline to remove all the foundations. This was set up in the demolition order that was issued in July of 2016. And since December 31st, 2017, we've been talking about post-wildfire recovery efforts. To give you some more detail about the wildfire, on May 1st, 2016, a suspected human-caused wildfire started towards the south of town. This was spotted by a helicopter of forestry crew in the remote area, and first responders responded to this wildfire within 45 minutes of information. This fire started moving towards Fort McMurray, and a state of local emergency was declared. On May 2nd, fire grew and evacuation orders were issued for 2 neighborhoods which were south of town, Prairie Creek and Gregoire, which were changed to voluntary evacuation by the evening because the direction of the wind had changed and the fire started moving away from town. However, overnight, the direction of the wind changed again and fire really grew. On May 3rd, the temperature was 32 degrees Celsius, relative humidity 12%, and a wind gust of 20 to 72 kilometers an hour. May 3rd was the day when the wildfire actually became the beast. It had hit 12 neighborhoods by 5 p.m. and by 6:20 p.m. in the evening, all of Fort McMurray was under mandatory evacuation. 88,000 people evacuated the city within a few hours. What you see on screen are some of the evacuation notices. So this evacuation notice came out at 3:55 p.m. The letters in bold are the name of the communities that were required to evacuate immediately. This came out at 6:20, which required all of Fort McMurray to evacuate the town. And then there were further information. There was further information that was posted by the municipality from time to time to inform residents as to what's happening. What I'm going to show you now is a video of what actually happened. This is the video shot by different residents of Fort McMurray, videos shown by news channels. It will give you a real-life impression of what people went through. The images in this video can be disturbing, distressing, so if you get affected by it, please step out for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll come back. So here it is.
we also saw up the way, this is Highway 63, the fire seems to be burning across the highway. So people who are trying to go southbound on Highway 63 here to get away from all of this now are likely having to turn around. But Donna, look at that. Like that, even in the past 5 minutes, has just flared up. And to be honest, I'm not sure how long we'll be able to stay here, but it shows how quickly things are changing.
The fire situation in Fort McMurray is absolutely critical right now. I'm standing here right next to the highway. This is one of the neighborhoods that's under evacuation. The fire is now cresting the trees. We're going to have to be leaving here very, very soon. See how close this is to all of the vehicles that are trying to flee the area. We've been watching helicopters, emergency personnel, all of them flying through here trying to deal with the fires that have now got within meters of Highway 63. We haven't got any confirmed reports of what's happening to any of the communities in there. We haven't been able to get there for obvious reasons, but you can't imagine that there's very much good that's happening.
We've been living at the campground for a year now. I had an RV, like Class A motorhome. Oh, it's a disaster. Everything I worked for the last 2 years, it's all gone in smoke now.
Our hearts go out to the residents and the citizens of Fort McMurray today. I know that it's a very scary time. I know it's a very, very stressful time for people to be having to leave their homes and under these conditions. Our focus is completely and entirely right now on ensuring the safety of people, of getting them out of the city and ensuring that they are safe and secure.
Gotta dodge, I can feel the heat here. This is insane. Oh, you can feel the heat. Holy shit. This is crazy.
I would say it's been the worst day of my career, and I am, you know, the whole, the people here are devastated. Everyone's devastated. The community is going to be devastated. This is going to go on. This is going to take us a while to come back from, but we'll come back.
you've seen here are real-life images of the fire. These are videos shot by different people from their cars as they move out of the city. It was a devastating experience. I'll share what I went through during this time. On May 3rd, I was going back to office after lunch at about 1 o'clock, and there's this huge cloud of smoke that was rising from the southern end of the city. By 1 o'clock, evacuation orders started to come in, and everybody in the office was on radio or on the news channels. I was amongst one of the last people to leave office. Others left. Some of the other people left because they lived in locations where evacuation orders were issued. I lived in a location where the fire had not hit yet. I walked out of the office and I did this. And there was ashes falling from the sky. And that's why I called it doomsday. I thought the world is going to end today. It was a situation like that. All black, all you can see is ashes falling down the sky. I went back home. We were expecting our first child. Picked up a few things, put them in the car, and left. I called my parents, and I told them we're leaving town, and when we come back, we may not have our home back. And we reached Edmonton at about 3 o'clock in the morning, left Fort McMurray about 6 o'clock. The typical driving time from here to Edmonton is about 4 hours. It took us 9 hours to get to Edmonton. There was so much traffic on road. The situation on roads was pretty packed jam. Everybody was trying to get fuel. The cars filled up. So the condition of the roads was just jam-packed. The traffic was not moving. There was a Shell station towards the side of the town that exploded. And that is the only entry point in the city. You cannot leave city south of town if that road, Highway 63, blocks out. I remember traveling 800 meters, took us 2 hours in a car. These are some of the reasons why I call it doomsday. The images on the screen, some of these images on the screen are, again, captured, taken by people, news agencies, and we'll show you some of the things that happened during that time, the level of destruction, the level of burnout that happened on that day. But people were very appreciative of each other. People were it was a very community feeling at that time because everybody was trying to help each other. There were people who were left out on streets. People were offering rides, free fuel, food, whatever they could do to help the community members. Now, to give you some more information on fire, this fire started on May 1st, and it was put out on August the 2nd, so it took 3 months to put the fire out, but it wasn't declared extinguished until 15 months after. The wildfire crews were continuously monitoring for hotspots, even during the winter season, to check if there were any left. The total area that this fire affected was about 5,895 square kilometers. This area is as big as Prince Edward Island. So imagine Prince Edward Island, all of it going into flames in just one go. Other cities like Chicago, Atlanta, Toronto, Delhi are all smaller than the area this fire affected. In terms of statistics, this is considered Canada's largest and costliest disaster, with a total direct and indirect cost of $9.9 billion. IBC, Insurance Bureau of Canada, states that they've paid out about $3.8 billion in insured damages for this fire. I want to show you guys some pre-fire and post-fire pictures of the neighborhoods. This is a pre-fire picture of an area called Stone Creek that we have here. This is the post-fire picture. Similarly, this is a pre-fire picture of an area called as Wood Buffalo Estates. This is what fire did to this neighborhood. this is a pre-fire picture of an area called Waterways that we have. This is a post-fire wildfire picture. And we have numerous such examples where the neighborhoods look like this, and post-fire they were like this. All in all, fire affected about 12 neighborhoods in the city, 2,000 buildings were affected, 25 dwelling units were lost, impacted a lot of people. Some of the recovery efforts that happened from May to June was immediately after the fire, REOC was established, Regional Emergency Operations Center, and that REOC was working on a number of things. Some of the major ones were preparing plans for re-entry, assessing damages, going house to house and check whether the house next to the fire or has smoke damages or is still habitable, assessing that and working with some agencies to inform residents about it. They were also working with the Chief Medical Officer of Health to assess or to work out dates for when re-entry could be allowed into the region. With that, I would invite Isela back to stage.
Yeah, so after all that, there was some municipal staff and some provincial staff and a lot of other people working, sorry, working in the municipality to bring the community in shape, in a position where citizens could come back, because you have to understand that when everything was evacuated, everything stopped. There was no supermarkets, there was no services, there was nobody here, so they had to reestablish that to be able for the community to come back, to be able for the citizens to be back and live in the community. And so there was a lot of work done by a lot of groups that were present in the community at the time. So they decided to, the June 1st was the day where the community started coming back. So this was the image that the citizens were looking at when they were coming back to the community. So that was an effort made by the firefighters, and this is what people were looking at when they were coming back that day. It was a very emotional day. Most of us were really tired to be outside our house for 1 month in hotels and not being able to know what was happening, what was the status of our houses. There was a lot of questions, so this was great to see that the community came together in many ways. So the re-entry was staggered, so not everybody came back at the same time. And so this urban service area was divided in different zones, and everybody was able to re-enter at different dates. So from June 1st to June 15th, there were re-entry dates for each neighborhood, and everybody was divided. So broadly speaking, as I was saying, the re-entry consists in the damage assessment of the neighborhoods, the remediation of utilities, bring back neighborhoods to where they can be live again, reestablishes essential services, and so that's what it was made before we were able to come and live there. So at this point, as you can understand, there was the social situation was very fragile, so there was a lot of people that were affected by the fire, that they didn't know what was going to happen, when were they going to have their homes back. Some of them were uninsured. Some of them, they have insurance, but they didn't know when the insurance was going to pay off, what were they going to do, if they're going to rebuild or not. And there was a lot of questions, like the population had a lot of questions. We all had questions. We all went through the same thing. So in efforts for the municipality to keep the communication open with citizens, there was a lot of information provided. So there was, for example, this information package that was given to each household. So when we get back, we have one package like that in each of the houses that provided general information about what to do in certain cases. So this was one of the pictures that we also see when we came back, and this was also community-based. So somebody just went in this sign that is out coming into Fort McMurray and put welcome home Fort McMurray. So there was a lot of, the community really came together to do these little things that make a difference, that mean a lot for us. But the municipality as a whole, as I was saying, created an environment where we could be in complete communication. So the effort for the municipality was reestablish, of course, the essential services. They have welcome centers, so this is an image of the welcome center. So in every of the stages where the neighborhoods came back, there was a welcome center like this in the neighborhoods, and there was information available. There was also the Here For You sessions, and that was engagement sessions that were planned once a week in each neighborhood, or depending where the theme or where we were at the re-entry recovery, we would have information sessions like Here For You. And there were also town hall meetings. So the town hall meetings were also done every week, and they had themes depending on what was needed for the community. And in those town hall meetings, there were presence of the municipal staff was there, the insurance bureau was there, the recovery task force was there. So every question that the community may have had we would try to answer and stay in communication with the community. So those were the efforts that the municipality as a whole created to be in constant communication with the population. And then for the planning and development side, it was a different side or a different level of problems that we had. I'm going to go somewhere. So the main task that was needed to be done or the initial task for planning and development was a file search. So what happened is that because the houses are destroyed, the neighbors are destroyed, also the information that the property owners had about the houses was gone. So the only source of information was the property files in planning and development. So we started providing that information to all the insurance and the property owners for them to be able to decide what they were going to do with the property. As such explained, the demolition orders were issued for every property that was affected by the wildfire, and they had a deadline for that demolition to happen because we wanted to move forward to rebuilding. We didn't want to be in a situation where people were rebuilding, but there's another property that was not demolished. We also face a problem with low grading, which we're going to explain later in more detail. We also have a problem about the property monuments or pins, which they disappear because they demolish everything, and they also took the pins. So there's no property pins anywhere. And these subdivisions that were affected by the wildfire, like in the previous session, Amanda was saying, were all subdivisions. So from the 70s, from the 60s, where the property pin were only existing in the lots of the blocks, and the corners of the blocks, but not in each lot. So we didn't have information. They were all gone. And we also face a problem of people trying to rebuild something completely different to what they had before. Some of the efforts that the municipality of planning and development work with is that we waive all the related fees for rebuilding. So the fees for rebuilding were waived. Development permits and building permits fees were waived on September 27, as such said. That is about $400,000. And also the promise given to the community was that we were going to issue permits in 48 hours. So if the permit was complete and all the information was provided, we will issue the permit in 48 hours, because obviously we didn't want to be the ones that we were holding the rebuilding. We wanted to move forward with the applications as soon as possible. So there was times where in average we could have 33 permits per day, and we had to process them. Like there was no maybe we will process. No, it was expected that the team was going to process these applications, and that was it. And with that, I'm going to talk about one of the instruments that planning and development implemented. So as I was saying, a lot of the people they didn't want to build the same. They didn't want to change typology, but they also, because the fire-affected areas were all neighborhoods, they didn't comply with the land use bylaw. So you know that in the MGA, there is a clause where it says that if it's destroyed more than 75%, now it has to comply with the land use bylaw. But we, as a municipality and the Planning and Development Department, that is unreasonable. We cannot say that we would not approve a permit for rebuilding, right? So we had to find a way to be able to approve these permits. So as the main issue was non-conforming lots, and we created an amendment to the land use bylaw, which we call the overlay bylaw. It's part 17 of the part 11 of the bylaw right now. And the idea of this amendment and the council, the purpose from council was to allow for rebuilding. So like for like proposals were going to be approved and processed. And it didn't matter if they didn't comply with the lot size, lot width, or lot length. So, and this overlay bylaw gives certainty for property owners about their rebuilding options. And now I'm going to take that to Jasmine that will explain you the workshop.
Well, now we all have the idea of what some of us in the room or people in Fort McMurray felt in the region. It's time for some wakey after lunchtime. Are you all ready? Okay. So what happened is, I know that Isabella and such have explained the technical side of it. You must understand that after demolition, people are now starting to come to the Planning and Development Department to start looking for their development permits. That means they have a vision for their house, they have a vision for some sort for their community. They're sharing it for the first time with the Planning and Development Department, and most likely our answer is going to be, oh no, you can't build this. So we are going to put you in that situation. We thought it'll be exciting for you all for the next 20 minutes or 25 minutes to feel the pressure of dealing with people who've gone through personal loss, who are in extreme trauma of some kind. They are frustrated with the system, but at the same time, they're also looking for some kind of hope from you. They want to build some kind of trust, and they are looking for a new normal. So you are in a situation where the legal document in the first step, before the overlay came in, the first step is you are not really able to help them directly in issuing the permits, but you are able to help them in understanding the situation better. So we will shortly introduce two hypothetical scenarios to you. When I say hypothetical, that doesn't mean that they are absolutely in the air. We've reworked some parts. You must remember, as Isabella mentioned, we were processing a high volume of permits at that time. So maybe a planner could be processing anything between 5 to 15 permits a day. With that pressure and with the kind of parameters that we had to evaluate, We were really short of time. So right now, I will go through the structure of the next half an hour. Like I said, 2 hypothetical scenarios. We'll rejig you in groups of 6, maybe 6 or 7 per table shortly. We expect you to work together, read the documents that will be provided to you on the table. Please do not use your expertise otherwise. Identify a note taker on your table because we will be, during the debriefing session, we will request you to share 3 challenges per table. When in doubt, do not ask us as a first step. Please reread the documents because we did not have too much guidance and hand-holding at that stage. Also, usually in workshops, they'll say, oh, don't rush. Well, we want you to rush. So at the back there, we will keep having announcements every 4 minutes. Whenever there's an announcement, that means you're supposed to move to the next step. That means you're done with the first step, whatever it was, close the envelope or put it aside, open the next envelope, get going. We expect you to evaluate the proposal in that package, consider the constraints and challenges, propose solutions for approval, provide quality, emphatic services, issue decision whether you are approving the permit, refusing the permit. Do keep in mind, as I said before, identify 3 challenges towards the end. So the note takers, whoever they are in the group, please be on your tips to do that. Remember that the maximum time that you will actually get in this whole workshop for every step is going to be 5 minutes. I know that he's going to shout it out at 4 minutes, but there is leverage or leeway for like 30 seconds every scenario, every step. One very important thing to keep in mind throughout the workshop is this is not a normal, everyday situation where you say approved or refused. Whenever you get that thought, go 1 step back, think about the people in that situation. They may have lost everything, financially, personally, whatever. So try to think about it as how may I assist in rebuilding this person or this applicant better instead of saying, oh, you can't do this. Oh, I'm so sorry, I heard you, but can't help you. And also, like I said, in every step, there are certain special instructions. So there is a context to every step. Read that carefully, and good luck. We will see you in 22, 23 minutes, because it'll take us 1 or 2 minutes to set up. Now, may I request all of you to either settle in groups of 6 or 7 per table. We do expect that you're going to do short introductions with each other, so please take a minute. The timer will start exactly after 1 minute for 20 minutes, and I repeat, every step will have a maximum of 5 minutes, a total of 20 minutes because we're taking an average of 4. Each step has 3 copies, so the same thing, 3 sets inside the package. There will be situations where you may need documents from the previous step for the next step. You will figure it out. And raise your hand if you really cannot figure it out. I mean, really. When you read the document, reread it, and you don't figure it out.
We have 20 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, you're at 4 minutes. Move on to your next task. Ladies and gentlemen, you're at 4 minutes.
So guys, move on to step 2 now. Take note of your decision for step 1. Move on to step 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can move on to the next section. Once again, your time is out. Move on to your next section. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could now switch to the fourth segment. Once again, the third segment is over. Please switch to the fourth segment. We're 15 seconds away from completion. Once again, 15 seconds away from completion. Ladies and gentlemen, please switch to your final unit in your package. Once again, it's now time to switch to the final unit in your package. Ladies and gentlemen, you have 60 seconds to finish up your workshop. Once again, 60 seconds to finish up your workshop.
Is it 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5? Okay, go for it. I'll let you do it.
Sorry, I thought it was, I gave the minute there. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Boom.
Pens down, hands in the air. Master Chef Canada. Here we go.
Yay.
All right, Erica.
All righty. I'm guessing that some of us were able to navigate through all the 5 steps. How does that feel? Did you feel the pressure to be issuing the permits? I think everybody's very happy right now. Maybe we didn't do this right. Team, probably we gave them too much time. Or less obstacles, I'm guessing. All right. Was everybody able to complete all the 5 steps? No? Oh, that's exactly what we wanted. How nice. It worked out perfect. I think now we can have each of the note takers from each of the table to speak up, because we do want to discuss what your challenges are like. You know what ours are like. We just played out, we enacted exactly what we felt at that time. So which table wants to go first? Okay. Just wait for the mic, because nobody will be able to hear you otherwise. Thank you. Thanks, Jana.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we didn't have a lot, obviously the obvious is that we didn't have a lot of time to review the plans and the regulations thoroughly to ensure accuracy and to understand the land use bylaw in terms of the requirements. And then we were interrupted by a customer.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. You were just interrupted by one. We had about 10 to 15 every day.
So obviously, a customer with a high level of emotions at the time. So there was the pressure to obviously deal with the customer in a compassionate manner, make sure they're, not more upset when they're leaving, but also the pressure to work quickly to finish and issue these development permits. We noticed that some of the paperwork was a little bit disorganized, so I'm assuming that's why.
That's exactly what
a lot
happened.
of the paperwork that came in, and some of the 2 families, they had constantly changing plans and revised plans, so
Tell
you
me
kind of
about
have
it.
to keep up with that. And one of the other things we were thinking too, because the overlay was a new thing, and in this high pressure situation, to interpret that new overlay and to apply it correctly to different sorts of applications would probably have been a huge challenge as well.
You got that about right. Awesome. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Hope you enjoyed it. Who's up next? Anyone? Yeah, go for it.
So the challenges we faced were fairly similar. The one thing that we noted was the overlay helped when that was implemented, but then it didn't help in every situation. So it was great to have that additional help to help kind of move permits and processes along, but then there were still situations where development permit applications still didn't apply even with the overlay. We also said that similar to the first group, with the permit's constantly changing. You put all this time into reviewing this permit, talking with the applicant, making sure you're kind of pulling some strings and probably interpreting things as loosely as possible.
Pull
to make
some
sure it
strings,
complies,
underlined.
just to have it change. And then lastly, trying to deal with civil matters between neighbors at the municipality level. So you don't know if the neighbors are talking to each other, you don't know what to say to each neighbor, how some neighbors might get along easier than others. That will help the process along.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Who's up next?
So one of the first challenges that we encountered, especially with the step one, was the lack of information, because all we had was kind of the information about the district and then the lot plan. And if there was anything that we didn't know about the property, we wouldn't be able to possibly issue the permit. Another problem was some of us weren't familiar with this municipality's land use bylaw, so there was some going back and rereading just to make sure that we actually had the right setbacks. And then as well, the distribution of tasks and labor, we found out at the end that if we had kind of, divvied up the tasks a little bit better, maybe we would have been able to accomplish on time.
Well, that's history.
Maybe.
No, thank you, Liana. Yes, you're up next. This table number 1 here, right in front of us, the quickest ones, who had 2 customers visiting them.
Yeah. I guess we might have gotten a different package because ours, we didn't run into many of those challenges. Our applicants actually had completed applications and had all the information. So from our point of view, we were actually able to get through these fairly quickly. Yeah. So we didn't really run into problems, and at the end of the day, we kind of went through it. We're like, get through it, get it done, and we kind of moved on with life. It helped having the mayor at the table.
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. He could stamp it right above all of us.
He gave variances for everything, so we moved on.
Yeah. Just so you know, the design was that you couldn't approve any of the permits. So that's how it worked. The idea behind this workshop was to give you a feel. Yeah, you got it because of the mayor, let's say. Who said it's going to be easy, sir? No, the idea was to give you an idea of how many times somebody can go back and forth, change their opinion while you tried to help them to the best of your ability. And also, one of the key things that we all learned was legal documents can be interpreted in many ways, especially when they're open-ended. You need to find a way to interpret those documents fairly, consistently, and also look forward towards the future. So sometimes there are places in the land use bylaw as well, especially ours, because it's from 1999, that you have some leeway, but you don't have a lot to help a person who's extremely distressed. So you need to find the right balance, set the right example, and also remember you're all human. You may have somebody screaming at the front desk. I didn't scream intentionally because I don't want to give you the exact stress that we felt. Many of us here in the room know exactly what it felt to be in the room with a person who was going through that situation. It's not easy. I'm smiling about it and laughing about it now, but I was definitely not the same. My supervisor is proof to that in 2016. So you make mistakes, we all do. We are all planners, we are learning. Just remember that the most important thing is to learn the lesson from the mistake. Try and avoid it. You may still end up making it because 48 hours is not too much time. It's just human to make errors. Respect the fact that you tried your best. You may be liable, but at the same time, you're doing your best. You're probably processing anything between 10 and 15 permits a day. I mean, what do you expect, really? In the background, you also need to remember that although this is stressful, there is a lot of negativity, we all somehow also found some kind of positivity through the fact that we are improving our process and moving forward. Such situations and such disasters, of course, as uncommon as they are, remember that once in a lifetime, if such a thing happens to you, and I hope it never does, it gives you a huge opportunity to improve your methods, systems, understand and learn from the challenges to go forward, how to make it better. We are already in the process of our land use bylaw rewrite, and we have had huge lessons from this wildfire. I mean, I don't think we can put it in words, But every single time now we look at our land use districts, we look at our land use bylaw, we look at the way we process our applications, we go through our checklists. We are always thinking about the people we left behind, whether they got their permits, whether their insurances went bankrupt, whether they decided not to go ahead with their permits, despite our approvals, despite our helping them going out of the way far and beyond, or simply because their contractors ran out of money and left the town. So whenever you're designing legal documents, policy documents, statutory documents, keep in mind, no matter how hard you try, you are going to have loopholes. You need to learn to move on with them and take pride in whatever work you do from your heart. With this, we move on to the next section, which is challenges, and I invite Sach to begin that section for you.
Thank you, Jasmine. We now want to inform you about some of the major rebuilding challenges that we had here. So other than challenges on a lot level, there were challenges at subdivision level. A lot of communities were damaged. The utilities, the infrastructure in those subdivisions, communities was damaged. And so the recovery team initiated a program for coordination between different utility companies to track progress of rebuilding of those utilities. This was primarily to ensure that all the utilities are there, get reconstructed in time for the time of rebuilding of lots. So we used to have weekly meetings with all the utility companies, ATCO Gas, Power, Communication, Shaw, Telus, and on a weekly basis we would track progress on how far they are in the rebuilding process. What are the major challenges they're facing, and how can we work together with them and amongst each other, amongst ourselves as a group, to basically remediate those challenges and help them move forward. The major idea was to support development as much as we can, as quickly as we can. So this was one of the initiatives. Another big project that we did here was the largest resurvey that province of Alberta had ever seen. So typically what happens is when you carve out a subdivision, the surveyors would place a 1 meter long rod, metal rod, in the ground, and these are called survey pins. These survey pins define the property corners. In areas that were subdivided before 1980s, subdivision pins were only placed at block corners. They were not placed at every lot corner. They were only placed at block corners. And a lot of subdivisions that we had affected were subdivisions that were constructed in old times. So while excavating the basements out, a lot of these survey pins were gone. They were damaged. So it was very difficult for surveyors to really go back and identify what the exact lot corner is. On the request of the municipality, the Director of Surveys Office in province of Alberta started a program for a resurvey where about 2,500 properties were resurveyed. Those pins were placed back in the ground. It was a huge cost. The details of this will be available tomorrow in presentation 5A, which is where have my property corners gone. Personnel from Director of Surveys Office from the province of Alberta will be here giving a presentation about it tomorrow. So if you're interested in learning more about it, you guys can attend that session as well. I'd invite Isela to talk about some grading issues that we faced.
Okay. Yeah, so the wildfire affected areas were subdivisions that were created in the 70s, 80s, and the 60s. So the design for the grading and how the water was gonna work in those subdivisions was either not created, or it was not available, or it had changed over time because the They have built over time maybe retaining walls, or they had changed how they look like. So we didn't have an overall grading plan for this subdivision. I'm sorry, this plan is really bad. But what we essentially did is we resurveyed the grading of these subdivisions and created new grading plans for those so that we are able to approve permits. In the permit process, we always check how the grading works in the subdivision level and the lot level. So we didn't have the opportunity to do that without the grading design. So the grading was completed sometime in December 2016, but before that we had approved some permits. So all the approvals were considered in the design, but some of them were lost in the process. So we had to kind of continuously working with engineering, the subdivision design, and the approvals that we have made to make sure that the grading works. And now I'm gonna give it back to Jenica to talk about the lot-specific challenges. So these were the subdivision level challenges, and then she's gonna talk about the lot-specific.
Thank you. Oh, the thing I said I wouldn't do, let's go backwards. So for the neighborhoods that were affected by the wildfire, very inconveniently, they weren't flat. So these were mostly neighborhoods built on hills or built in valleys. So already pre-wildfire, you have neighborhoods that have topographical challenges. So even without a wildfire situation, it's a very technical challenge to construct on these lots. So for example, you would run into situations where between two lots you could have up to 8 feet of a grade change. So whether that or not that's two lots right beside each other or going front to back. So that creates some technical construction challenges. So after the wildfire, these lot-specific challenges were made even worse by as Zayla mentioned, no records. We had very limited records in some of these older neighborhoods, which created some challenges for how to approve permits. There was also retaining walls that were constructed over time without approval. So we had no real proof that they had ever existed. And the absence of those retaining walls created some issues on their own. The grading conflict between two lots individually created such significant conflict that we're still dealing with those issues today. So early on, right after the wildfire occurred and we were starting to approve permits, we didn't have some of these records. So what we did was we used LiDAR data to basically approve permits based on what existed prior to the wildfire. So there was no guarantee that these were lots that were currently functioning or functioning prior to the wildfire, but we were basically just recreating that scenario. After that's really terrible, the master grading plans came into play, they would take into account the entire subdivision, so theoretically they would all function. And then as those master grading plans were developed, the approved plans would be integrated, but there was a couple that fell through the cracks, which would result in conflicts between two properties. Also with the retaining wall situation, over time, because a lot of these neighborhoods were constructed in the 1970s or earlier, neighbors would kind of do a DIY grading project. So they would take their very sloped backyards or front yards and then decide to build retaining walls out of a multitude of materials. So in this image, you see some concrete blocks being used. You have steel piles with some lumber. A very common material was the use of railway ties, which I don't know if you're familiar, but they're very flammable. So when the wildfire came through, it wiped out a lot of these retaining walls that we had no record ever existed. So you have situations where people have an approved plan, they go and they construct, they come home after a year or however long they've been out of their home, and their once beautiful backyard, which was flat and wonderfully landscaped, is now a small toboggan hill. So that created some challenges between neighbors and their builders, and unfortunately between us and residents. So one of the major challenges that is a particularly time-consuming task for us is dealing with these lot-specific grading conflicts between two properties. And these emerge from a multitude of situations. In some cases, because again, the topographical change in a neighborhood was pretty all over the place. You could have a situation where you have 1.5 feet of a difference, or you can have 8 feet of a difference. So the different types of interventions would vary quite significantly from like a weeping tile system or just moderate low retaining walls to something like the case here, which is an almost 6-foot tall concrete retaining wall. So on the left, you have a home that was spared from the wildfire, and then on the right, you have a rebuild. So the grade change was so significant that they had to put in a retaining wall that size. To give you some context, the fence is about 6 feet high, 2 meters high, and the retaining wall is about the same. So the implications of such a small little, one would think small change, really had significant financial implications. All of these retaining walls had to be engineered. They required permits. And then came in the question, well, whose fault is it? Why does this exist? Is it because the municipality approved it incorrectly? Is it because my builder doesn't know what he's doing and built it incorrectly? What's going on? So there was a lot of pointing fingers, a lot of blame, who was going to bear that financial cost, and it really caused a lot of tension between neighbors. So as was mentioned, and as some of you kind of experienced through the workshop, nonconformity, whether or not it was nonconforming buildings or uses or lots, definitely came into play. So keeping in mind again that the wildfire, I don't know why it decided to target the oldest neighborhoods, but it did. So it hit all the neighborhoods that had nonconforming issues. So as the bylaws changed, as the policy changed, these little nonconforming issues would pop up, and usually they're not a big deal. Once a use moves on, then a new conforming use moves in. Not a big deal. That's how planning change happens. That's a good thing. That's what you learn in school, is how neighborhoods progress and change. Unfortunately, when the wildfire came through, that change was accelerated unintentionally. So as Azalea mentioned when she was talking about the overlay bylaw, and as some of you experienced, it really protected the building footprint. It didn't protect the use. So in this particular case, we're looking at a church in the community of Waterways. It had been there for quite some time. It was a religious assembly use. Over time, policy and bylaws changed, and with the coming and the adoption of the 1999, which seems like ages ago, land use bylaw, now religious assembly isn't a use in that district. So what we had to do was work with them. Even though they could technically rebuild the same structure, they wouldn't be able to occupy it as a religious assembly because the use wasn't contemplated in the district. So we had to work with them, and I don't know if any of you have experienced the time-consuming process that is a land use bylaw amendment, but when you're already dealing with the financial and stressful situation that is rebuilding, it took some time. There was a lot of time invested into that particular rebuild. It did not come to fruition 2 years later, much to my own personal distraughtness, but they found a nice new location. Wish they would have done that right after the fire. So then there's also the non-conforming lots. So the lots themselves were protected under the overlay bylaw, so you could still build on a non-conforming lot. You weren't running into a situation where you couldn't build anything because your lot didn't conform. But even though you were given the option to rebuild, that didn't remove the fact that you had a narrow lot, a very, very narrow lot in some cases. Half of you got the scenario of Abasand, where you were dealing with 30-foot and 25-foot wide lots. Now, these lots were designed as a patio home townhouse style development, where the intent was really to have typologies that were attached to one another, whether or not those were townhouses or semi-detached. So the narrow lots were designed in such a way so that it didn't really matter because you're attaching to your neighbor. So after the wildfire happened, people were really at the mercy of the decisions of their neighbors. So if your neighbor was unfriendly to you and didn't want to attach, maybe they wanted to have a single detached dwelling and you were out of luck. Maybe your neighbor had a different insurance company and they were taking forever and that delayed your own rebuild. Maybe they had a different contractor who didn't know how to build that type of development. Or maybe they went bankrupt or didn't have insurance. All of these kind of things took into account what you were actually able to rebuild. So the lots that were affected the most by this were the 25-foot wide lots. They were the ones that were most severely impacted. A few of these lots were even so unfortunate that they had a 2.5-meter utility right-of-way running along the side. So you've got almost 4 feet that you can't build on because there's a gas line running through. You can't attach to your neighbor, and now you have to comply with the land use bylaw. So it was a really challenging situation. One of the things that we did was we teamed up with legal and safety codes, and we developed this document to help guide these poor, unfortunate property owners on a zero lot line development. So when you're looking at a zero lot line development and you're not attached to something, there's a lot of different factors that come into play. From a land use bylaw perspective, you are now required to provide a maintenance easement. From a legal standpoint, you had to think about how that maintenance easement was going to be registered. So if it's registered as a registered plan or as a caveat, and those have different implications to them. And then, under the Alberta Building Code, if you build on a zero lot line, there's a whole other wave of implications that come into play with fire rating, unprotected openings, that sort of thing. So we tried to provide one document that was a one-stop shop that explained what those implications were, and that would help to better facilitate a property owner's decision whether or not they wanted to build on the lot line. Again, they were still at the mercy of their neighbor and whether or not their neighbor liked them and was willing enough to give them a 1-meter maintenance easement. Personally, I have spent countless upon countless of hours sitting down and explaining to property owners, to neighbors, what the implications are if they grant a maintenance easement to their neighbor, and coaching the one who's getting the maintenance easement about what kind of things need to be involved in that document to make sure that they're protecting themselves in the best possible way. I now know far more about maintenance easements than I had ever thought I would ever know in my entire life, than I'd ever wanted to know in my entire life. Another one of the things that popped up in challenges was environmental constraints, and none of the neighborhoods were more impacted by these than the community of Waterways. On the northeast side, they were faced with a flood hazard area. And on the southwest side, they were faced with a geotechnically disturbed hill. So they're kind of sandwiched between a rock and a hard place. So if you kind of were in this sweet spot, you magically got none of them. You weren't in the flood hazard area and you weren't in the geotechnical area. But the vast majority of lots were in one or the other. So in the case of the floodplain, we had flood regulations that dictated how you were to construct in a flood hazard area, which are quite onerous. If anybody's familiar with Dutch development and how they construct in floodplains, it gets very costly very quickly. So when you're looking at a single detached dwelling or a manufactured home property owner and you're trying to tell them how to flood-proof their house, it becomes challenging. Some amendments were made at council and they were able to rebuild in that location, but they had to sign off on a slew of documents, including restrictive covenants and release of liability waiver forms and the whole 9 yards, to make sure they were 100% sure that they knew, and that we were sure that they knew, that they were rebuilding in a flood hazard area. Some neighborhoods, or some property owners, took it upon themselves to flood-proof their house. So we had one case in Draper, which is just down the road, where they actually chose to have no habitable floor space on the first floor. All their habitable floor space was above. So those were the kind of challenges that the flood hazard people were facing. On the other side, we have now a very unstable slope. And this was in part due to the wildfire. Going back to any of your geography courses, when you remove vegetation, then you have erosion and et cetera, et cetera. So the municipality undertook a geotechnical study to see what the impact was about that particular slope on the lots. So what the outcome of that study is a classification of different lots, and depending on what category that lot fell into was what the implication was for them. So in some cases, the municipality had to acquire lots. In other cases, there was a voluntary buyout that occurred. So if the geotechnical considerations were so onerous that it may be cost prohibitive to develop, they were given that option to have voluntary buyout. I believe all except for one property owner chose to go that route. And then in the blue area, which is kind of a happy color, there was additional geotechnical requirements, so they had to provide a report. but they weren't prevented from rebuilding. In terms of development permits and the volume of applications we received, by far the more number of applications was for demolitions, and that's for an obvious reason. We ordered them to apply for demolition permits. So we have a large amount, one demolition permit typically per structure. And then, because the wildfire mostly impacted suburban residential development, your next big number is single detached dwellings. The wildfire impacted 7 multifamily developments. These multifamilies had the majority of the dwelling units, so it impacted the majority of the people, but the time that you put into one multifamily was enormous relative to one single detached. So you put up the number of 7 multifamily development permits and it doesn't look that impressive, but when you look at the amount of time and the number of dwelling units, the number of people who resided in those typologies, that's where it really hits home. When you look at the time crunch and how we receive development permit applications, you see that massive spike in July and August, and what you're really seeing there is the spike in demolition permits. So obviously, because we gave them a deadline, we got all the demolition permits at once. Yay for us. And then shortly thereafter, you see a little bit of a spike, and that's your single detached dwelling permits. It decreases a bit into the winter and then pops up a little bit for the following building season for those who weren't able to build in 2016. Fortunately, we are finally seeing a tapering off. I will now pass it back to Azela, who's going to give you an idea of where we are at today.
So right now, as Jenica was saying, we are about 87% of the development permits have been approved, and then we are at 47% of the final inspection on buildings. Not all the buildings, or not all the residential buildings go out final inspection. Maybe Greg can let me know, but that's what it is, the official number. So we have come a long way. Like after all that happened, after all the houses that were lost and the, I guess, problems that the wildfire caused, we have come a long way. So these images are for the first house, one of the first houses that was rebuilt in one of the neighborhoods. This is in Wood Buffalo, in the neighborhood I live. So I pass there every day and I snap these pictures. And then the one in the right is a house that was bringing into Beacon Hill, so one of the first houses that was brought into that neighborhood. This is a picture of one of the multifamilies that was wiped out in Avasan. So right now they had occupied, so they have occupancy now. And there's people living in these houses, and they have. I went last week there to take these pictures. They have a nice banner saying "Welcome Home, Rabin Park." So all these multifamilies have been there. I think we have one left. That is a terrifying story. So I'm not gonna get into that. But as a team of planners. We went through a lot together during these 3 years. We experienced ups and downs, and what I can say is that as a team we learned to rely on each other, we learned to support each other, and we learned to take care of each other because we went through a very difficult time. I would be lying if I'm telling you that this was not challenging. But we learned to understand each other to a point that we were like, maybe you should take a day off tomorrow, and because it was challenging, it was very stressful. But we are, I think what it helped, or personally what it helped me, was to focus in the day-to-day wins, what we achieved today, that is better than yesterday. And so piece by piece, we were able to help the community to come back. So that's where we are today, and this is the end of our presentation. So we will have some time for questions.
Is there any, sorry, is there any questions? All right.
I'm just wondering with the shortened timelines for permit issuance, did you see an increase in appeals on those issuance?
No. By some Christmas miracle, no. There was a couple cases where they were appealed, but it was more so because we couldn't approve them, and they were appealed that way. But there were very few appeals related to the wildfire.
Anyone else? All right.
Not related so much to planning, but I'm just wondering as a staff, what systems were put in place, because obviously you yourselves had also gone through a very traumatic event, and then to come back and be put in a very stressful environment dealing with people who are themselves dealing with trauma. So what systems were put in place to sort of help your staff move through that and still effectively work?
So we have, when we came back, we have a series of sessions about how to deal with stress and ourselves, like how to recognize our own level of stress and how far can we go. So that the session was done internally as a municipality. And we also have sessions for the public, and we had when we came back, and then after, I think every 6 months there was sessions provided to the staff about mental health and how to deal with loss and how to deal with stress. And there was also a session about how to deal with difficult people. So, yeah, we had security for the first 6 months in the building. So, and as I say, I think from my perspective, and I don't know if my team members want to add anything, what it helped me is to understand and recognize my own limits, but also my team members. So I work with very close with them for a long time. Like Tracy Tester is in the other room, and we really take care of each other. Like we really were kind of like looking out for each other and saying, I think this, you have reached a point where you have to step back a little bit. And I think we did that together as a team. We did lost some staff after the fire. So, I mean, I think those things were unavoidable. Like we couldn't avoid that. I don't know if that's such you want to add anything?
I think the most important point that we had in our mind was that this is a stressful time, not only for us, but for community as a whole. And everybody had this mindset where everybody was trying to look out for everybody else. So it was a good time for community bonding. There was a lot happening. Everybody sort of understood where the other person was coming from. We had difficult clients, we had easy ones, but in case where we would get a difficult client, and if one person was dealing with that, after that person would come back, we would share what happened, how to better deal with a situation like that. Primarily, I felt that was one of the times when I had seen this community at the peak of brotherhood or looking out for each other. And that, I think, went a long way for us to come back to where we are today. So I'd say that looking out for each other was the main thing.
All right, so on behalf of APPI, did you have one more question? All right, sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Rojan from the City of Edmonton. Question, I was wondering, how did you deal with situations when you had a duplex or a row housing or a semis that it's like half of it is destroyed or demolished, and then the homeowner would come in and wanted to rebuild, but then they can't get to the other side of the building or the other homeowner. Like, how did you deal with that?
So in case of a semi-detached house, and Isela and I were talking about it, where we had researched some examples of really half-built semi-detached structures. Where on one side, it would be on zero lot line, but it would be just a plain wall on the other side. In cases like that, people had different options. The first option was that you could go back and convert your semi-detached house to a single-family house, in which case you'll have to leave setbacks on both sides. The second option was you have to construct a firewall on one side where you were attached, and then you can go on zero lot line. This goes back to the example that Jenica explained about how zero lot line lots were dealt with. 3 scenarios. First was you could deal with it through variances. Second was you could construct a fire hall and have a maintenance easement on the other side. And then the third one was that you had the option to convert your semi-detached house into single detached with the option of leaving a setback on the other side. Yes.
Hi there. I'm Cameron with the town of Strathmore. It's more of an open-ended question, but would you have done anything differently looking back on how you approached permits and now that the wave is kind of
Well,
I
I think you learn through time. This is one of a lifetime event, and I really don't hope this happens to anyone. But this is not something that we were experienced in. We'd never imagined something like this could ever happen to us or to anybody else for that matter. Given the scale of this disaster, as we went through, there were a number of things we could have done differently. But would I hope that we get another opportunity to do it differently? No, absolutely not. Would I hope someone else gets to learn from the experiences that we have had? No, because I don't want something like this to happen to anybody else. But if there is, I wouldn't necessarily say an opportunity, but if there's an incident like that, then yes, absolutely, there are experiences that we could share through our works here that could perhaps help other municipalities in the time when they are in a similar situation. So yes, there are things that we could have done differently. And for me to tell you there would be one, it wouldn't be possible. There could be many things that we could have done differently to deal with it better. But are we experienced in it? No. So it is an absolutely open-ended question. Yes, I agree. And I don't have a perfect answer to it. So, absolutely.
From a permitting perspective. Thanks, Sach. I'll just add from a permitting perspective. I'm very happy that there were some things that were done correctly, so I'd highlight them. Just like Isela said, we had good training. I was new to Canada when I came here after the wildfire. Pretty fresh, pretty green. The first thing that really helped me was the after the wildfire. The training session was named After the Wildfire. So you go in there, you talk about if you have any stresses, how to deal with difficult people. There was another, and there's an ongoing session within our municipality. We are lucky. We get trained with verbal judo. So what do you do in a situation when you think you cannot handle the person standing in front of you at the front counter? We had multiple, me, Jenica, Isela, and such, I guess, to some extent, I guess, Rojan also, we were on the firing line at the front desk. So it was very helpful to know that you could do certain things to call your supervisor in immediately when you're feeling overwhelmed by somebody, if you're feeling that you would not be able to give the correct answer or you're being pressured to give an answer that you don't want to give. So I would rather talk about the things also that were done correctly in our situation trainings. Talking out to each other. We had weekly development officers meeting at that time. So every Wednesday, we would actually sit down and debrief. We would talk about situations that were tough, were well handled or not so well handled, and how to go about it in a better way the next time. What I would like to change, if ever, something 1/10 the scale of this or 1/100th the scale of this happened, was that maybe and this is just an outsider's perspective entering into the planning and development, maybe have the opportunity or ask for more time. I understand that people were very excited to come back to their communities, but maybe now looking back at it, maybe we were rushed into issuing development permits. I know that no municipality could hold that up, but if ever I could help the community to understand this a bit better in some way, shape, or form, I would have said, you know what, you've gone through this, take a step back, take time, breathe, think what you want your community to look like, and go back. Because what ended up happening was, now we have, in some minute corners of different neighborhoods, we do have piecemeal developments. So that, as a planner, I feel that I couldn't have done anything about it, but maybe we could have, or maybe the people could have been in a situation where they realized what having different shapes and different forms on an urban design scale would look like. So I guess it's more you do you, right, in that situation. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to go to our website. We do have the zero lot line document there. Read through it. You have any questions, get back to our office. We'll be very happy to assist you.
I think that deserves another round of applause right there. Thank you so much to our presenters. This was a fantastic presentation. I was enthralled the whole time, and I really liked the workshop portion of it, definitely. So there'll be a coffee break in the area before, just kind of down the hallway, and it is sponsored by Chef Andrew. So go grab some snacks, grab some coffee, and our next session will start at 3:30. Thank you so much. Oh, wait, we have one more thing.
I want to add, can I go to the last slide? Oh, okay. This one. Okay, so now we have a little frame so you can take a picture now. You have rated. Oh! So we have the frame available here, and we can help you take some pictures if you want to.
All right, congratulations.